headlines. Korea's exports in October hit a record $50.5 billion, up more than 7% year-on-year, reflecting a nascent economic recovery and improving the prospects of sustained growth. President Park Geun-hye will embark on an 8-day European trip tomorrow that will take her to France, Britain, and Belgium, which she'll focus on boosting economic and business interests under her sales diplomacy drive. Plus, Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries has been ordered to pay $140,000 each in compensation to 5 Koreans who were forced to work for the company during Japan's colonial rule of the Korean Peninsula. Well, these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Friday, the first day of November here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin this evening with some good news on the trade front. Korea's monthly exports topped $50 billion for the first time in October.
This has raised expectations for a stronger than expected economic recovery in the coming months. Arirang has the details.
Korea's trade ministry said Friday that the nation's exports hit a record high $50.5 billion last month, up 7.3% from a year earlier. The previous monthly record was $49 billion posted in July 2011. The ministry attributes the record month to a surge in shipments to the United States and the European Union.
With demand recovering in advanced nations, Korea's exports are expected to keep growing in the coming months.
By sector, exports of information technology products such as semiconductors and mobile phones led the way in October. Outbound shipments of automobiles also grew significantly by over 20% after production at Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors normalized following partial strikes in September. Imports also rose by around 5% to $45.6 billion, making for a trade surplus of over $4.8 billion last month. October marks the 21st straight month in which Korea has posted a trade surplus, bolstering expectations that the Korean economy is on the path to gradual recovery.
Korea's rising exports will boost domestic demand and the number of jobs, which will contribute to the Korean economy's recovery in the fourth quarter.
The central bank said last week that the nation's economy grew 3.3% in the third quarter of this year from a year earlier, the fastest pace of expansion in nearly 2 years. Despite the rosy outlook, the Trade Ministry cited the U.S. budget standoff and the Fed's planned tapering of its bond-buying stimulus program as major uncertainties that could have a negative impact on the nation's exports. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Staying with economic news, Korea's consumer prices grew at their slowest pace in 14 years in October, staying in the 0% range for the second straight month.
Statistics Korea said Friday that the nation's inflation rate edged up just 0.7% last month from the same period a year earlier, slowing from a 0.8% gain in September. The figure marks the slowest yearly growth since July 1999, when consumer prices grew 0.3%. The agency attributed the slowed growth to a drop in the prices of farming and petroleum products. And here's the result of an assessment by the International Monetary Fund of Korea's overall economic conditions.
The IMF has decided to maintain its growth outlook for next year at 3.7%, saying it has fared well despite the recent financial turmoil. Our Yoo Ji-hye reports.
IMF officials say Korea has weathered the recent global uncertainties and financial turmoil relatively well.
And is really well positioned to both benefit from the global recovery, but also withstand any further turmoil or uncertainty coming from the global environment. And that reflects its strong fundamentals and skilled policymaking.
Isabel Mateos Ilago, the assistant director of the IMF's Asia-Pacific department, led the team of officials who met with key financial and economic policymakers in Korea over the past 2 weeks to assess Korea's economic health. Speaking at a press briefing on Friday, she said Korea will achieve 2.8% GDP growth this year and 3.7% growth in 2014. She says the numbers, which went unchanged from previous IMF forecasts, reflect Korea's stability in the financial sector, with banks now less vulnerable to external liquidity shocks. However, in the longer term, she says, Korea will still face some challenging tasks at home, with rising corporate and household debt heavily weighing down the domestic economy.
We are somewhat less optimistic, however, about growth prospects in the longer run, given the relatively weak momentum of domestic demand, which will imply continued heavy reliance on net export on the one hand, and then given on the other hand the pressures from rapid population aging, which will push down potential growth.
To fight against such possibilities, the team concluded that Korea needs to prioritize its policies on boosting domestic demand and increasing the level of income growth. Yuri-an, Arirang News.
The President Park Geun-hye will embark on a week-long European tour on Saturday, which will take her to France, Britain, and Belgium.
Our presidential office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo has more on the president's last overseas trip for this year.
The focus of President Park's trip to Europe will be strengthening cooperation with European countries in the areas of creative economy and finance. Korea sees Britain as having the most potential for cooperative projects given its strong financial sector. Senior Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs Cho Won-dong told reporters that a large number of MOUs are currently being discussed with Britain, including one on setting up a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in Korea and another on cooperation between the financial watchdogs of the two nations. In addition, the Korea Development Bank and a British venture capital company are expected to sign an MOU during President Park's state visit to Britain, opening the doors for Korean venture firms to garner investment from that country. President Park also aims to pave the way for Korean companies seeking to participate in joint projects with France when entering third markets such as Africa and Russia. The presidential office of Cho Won-dong said that Korea and France will discuss ways to work together to lay a foundation for a creative economy in Korea based on the European country's advanced technology and cultural content. They will also discuss cooperation on a series of mega energy projects. During her 8-day trip to France, Britain, and Belgium, President Park is scheduled to hold bilateral talks with French President François Hollande, British Prime Minister David Cameron, Belgian Prime Minister Elio Di Rupo, and the presidents of the EU Commission and European Council. She will also meet with Queen Elizabeth II and Belgium's King Felipe. In addition to reprising her sales diplomacy approach to her talks with European leaders, President Park is expected to engage in soft diplomacy to connect with the European people. She'll be attending Korean drama and film events during her trip and will tour a university in London. Eoh Jin-joo, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit Korea for 2 days later this month, becoming the first leader among the 4 major countries neighboring Korea to visit Seoul in the Park Geun-hye administration.
The presidential office of Cho Won-dong announced Friday that the two leaders would meet over 2 days starting November 12th. That during the talks, they're expected to seek ways to further develop their political and economic ties and discuss ways to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. But this is the second bilateral summit between the two leaders, following their first on the sidelines of the G20 summit in St. Petersburg in September. The Friday was the last day of the 20-day parliamentary audit for most of the standing committees.
The alleged meddling by the spy agency and the military in last year's presidential election dominated much of the final session. Our Kim Yeon-ji reports.
The Judiciary and Defense Committees on Friday focused on fresh allegations that the National Intelligence Service and the military's Cyber Warfare Command Unit launched an extensive online smear campaign against opposition candidates before the presidential election last December. The scandal has captured Korean politics and widened into a broader debate about the legitimacy of last year's presidential election. During the Judiciary Committee's audit session, opposition lawmakers accused the Justice Minister of putting pressure on the prosecutors investigating the case. while ruling party lawmakers said the opposition is making the issue bigger than it really is. Justice Minister Hwang Kyo-won pledged to do his part to clear up any remaining suspicions surrounding the case, while denying the accusation that he used his influence to pressure prosecutors. At the Defense Committee's audit session, Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin promised to complete the military's ongoing investigation into the allegations against the Cyber Command Unit and protect the political neutrality of the military. He asked lawmakers to refrain from making this a political issue, saying that doing so would put South Korea's cybersecurity at risk. Now that the audit is practically over for most standing committees, lawmakers are expected to begin reviewing pending bills and next year's budget starting next week. But the wide gap between them suggests that they may have difficulty carrying out any legislative activity in the remaining weeks of this parliamentary session, which ends in December. As they wrap up the audit, the ruling Saenuri Party said the rival parties must all move on from the spy agency scandal in order to take care of more pressing livelihood issues. The main opposition Democratic Party disagreed, saying that ensuring democracy and bringing stability to the political arena are some of the most pressing issues they must address. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
In a landmark ruling, a Korean court on this Friday ordered a Japanese steelmaker to compensate 5 Koreans who were victims of forced labor during Japan's 35-year colonial rule of Korea.
Right, pundits say the verdict could influence pending cases of forced labor compensation of Japanese enterprises. And to tell us more, we connect live with our Park Ji-won at the News Center. Ji-won, hello.
Hi, Sean and Ji-hye. Yes, Korea's Gwangju District Court on Friday afternoon ruled in favor of 5 individuals who had filed compensation claims against Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. The court ordered the Japanese firm to pay the victims of forced labor some $140,000 per person in damages. The 5 women, mostly in their 80s, were forced to work for the company without pay for nearly a year and a half in the mid-1940s, right before Korea's liberation from Japan. The victims were in their early teens at the time, a violation of the international human rights norms of the era. The victims filed a compensation lawsuit against the Japanese government and Mitsubishi back in 1999 in a Japanese district court, only to have their case thrown out by Japan's Supreme Court in 2008. Well, at that time, the Japanese court said individual compensation claims had already been settled in Japan's reparations package of $800 million to Korea in 1965, when the two countries restored diplomatic relations. However, Korea's Supreme Court ruled last year that the reparations deal does not preclude individuals from claiming damages. So these 5 victims finally received a verdict in their favor 14 years after filing their compensation lawsuit against the Japanese firm.
Ji-won, we hear there are other similar cases that are still pending in Korean courts, right?
Yes, Ji-hye. Well, actually, this is the 3rd case in which victims of forced labor have won compensation claims against Japanese firms in a Korean court. But earlier this year, the Seoul High Court ruled in favor of 4 other forced laborers and ordered Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation, previously known as Nippon Steel Corporation, to pay 4 former workers 100 million won, or about $94,000 each in wages and damages. In the same month of July, the Busan High Court ruled in favor of 5 other victims of forced labor in their compensation claims against Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Well, however, the Japanese firms have appealed those rulings, and Korea's Supreme Court is still reviewing the cases.
However, Ji-won, do rulings in Korean courts have a binding effect on Japanese firms? And in this case, how will they get Mitsubishi to comply?
Well, Sean, it's a little complicated. If the Japanese companies refuse to comply with the Korean court's final ruling, the plaintiffs can still ask the company's assets be frozen in Korea or in 3rd countries. Well, these companies have Korean branches or hold shares in some Korean companies, so there are ways to receive damages from them. The companies could also voluntarily decide to pay damages on their own, taking into consideration the public relations effect of such a case. The Korean government says an estimated 150,000 Koreans were forced into labor between 1910 and 1945 when Japan colonized the peninsula. Well, many of them have died, but experts say at least 180 other victims of forced labor during Japanese colonial rule are also planning to file a compensation suit against Japanese firms in the future. So we can expect similar lawsuits to follow.
All right, Soo-won, thank you very much for that report.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise.
Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature, circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Meaning came on the news. We're trying to cover up the South's true intentions.
Turning now to the latest conflict over Japan's online video offensive over the Dokdo Islet. The Japanese Foreign Ministry has posted yet another video claiming ownership of Korea's Dokdo, but this one is in English. Our Han Da-eun has more on Seoul's immediate request to Tokyo to delete the content.
This is a new English version video clip that promotes Japan's sovereignty over the Korea-controlled Dokdo Islets. The footage, newly posted by the Japanese Foreign Ministry on its website, is the second of its kind, following the original Japanese version posted a week ago. Like the previous one, the video claims that Dokdo is Japanese territory, saying Japan gained sovereignty over the rocky islets in the 17th century and reaffirmed its claim in 1905.
In 1905, the Japanese government reaffirmed its intention to claim sovereignty over Takeshima by a cabinet decision.
Takeshima is what the Japanese call the Dokdo Islets. Seoul's foreign ministry immediately urged Tokyo to delete the content, arguing that Japan's sovereignty claim is unjust.
We make a strong protest against the Japanese Foreign Ministry's posting of a new video clip on its website. We once again strongly urge the Japanese government to delete the video immediately.
While the new footage has gained over 400,000 views and more than 7,000 recommendations, a Dokdo promotion video produced by the Korean government has been deleted due to copyright complications. Parts of the footage were allegedly taken from Japan's state-run broadcaster NHK without permission. Seoul says the promotion video will be made in 7 different languages, but it looks like Korea is lagging behind Japan, at least in terms of promotion efforts. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
Another development in the U.S. spying scandal. This time, a report out of Australia claims that the U.S. National Security Agency is using Australian embassies in Asia to intercept phone calls and data across the region. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
A handful of Asian nations, including China, are demanding an explanation from the United States following reports Washington is engaging in electronic intelligence gathering at Australian embassies and consulates in their countries. The Sydney Morning Herald reported Thursday that Australian embassies in Asia, including the one in Beijing, were being used as part of a U.S.-led spying operation. It reported U.S. National Security Agency documents show the Australian government has been allowing the NSA to operate in its embassies in Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, China, and East Timor. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the U.S. should abide by international law and regulations.
China is extremely concerned about this report and asks that the U.S. offer a clarification and explanation. We also ask that foreign embassies in China and their staff respect the Vienna Convention and other international treaties and should not get involved in any activities that harm China's security and interests.
The Indonesian government also summoned the U.S. ambassador in Jakarta to clarify the allegations. As the scandal continues to deepen, the man who sparked it all, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, has found a job in Russia. A Russian lawyer aiding Snowden said Thursday that he will start work in November, providing support for a large Russian website. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Korean series reached pivotal Game 7 on Friday night, and we have a champion.
And Stephen Che joins us to fill us in on the details of the series deciding game. Stephen.
Hey guys, one team was going to go down in history as the victor. Now let's get straight to our last KBO highlights of the season. It's the Bears' Yoo Hee-kwan on the mound versus the Lions' Chang Won-sam. Now we go on to the first. The Bears' Kim Hyun-soo hits in the run. The Bears are on the board first. Now to the bottom, Samsung's Park Geun-hye comes in on the sac fly. It's 1-1 tied ball game. Now to the third, the Bears' Lee Jong-uk comes home on a sac fly as well. 2-1, Tusan's up. But Samsung ties it up in the fifth, and all this before exploding in the sixth. 5 runs come in, including these 2 by Park Seok-min. It's 7-2. Now, 7th inning, the Bears' Son Si-hyun gets one back with a homer, but it's not enough. Oh Seung-wan comes in to close it, and Samsung wins with a final score of 7-3 to become your Korean Series champions. And with the victory, the Samsung Lions became the first team to be crowned champions 3 years in a row since 1988. The Het Tigers accomplished the feat from 1986 to 1988 before winning their 4th straight the following year. So, congratulations to the 2013 KBO Korean Series champions, the Samsung Lions, for a job well done. Now, goodbye baseball, hello basketball. Let's wrap up the week with Friday's top KBL matchups, starting with the Mobis Phoebus taking on the Dongbu Promi. Now, Dongbu's trying to break their 3-game losing streak, and they're down 7 at the half. But they come back in the third thanks to Tu Kyu-min. But Mobis is still too much for them. Ham Ji-hun scores 19. Rod Benson gets his 5th double-double, and Mobis wins it 82-70. Meanwhile, Anyang KGC visited the LG Sakers in Changwon. The Sakers can't get it done on defense, and they're down 12 at the half, and they won't come back. KGC's Sean Evans drops 24 and 15, and KGC wins 85-72. Now that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Looks like the pleasant autumn weather is over for a while. There's rain in the forecast over the weekend.
Right, for the details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, Sean and Chi-hye. As Sean mentioned, it is expected to rain over the weekend, and the shower should bring fine dust from China along with it. Now, moving on to our satellite map. As you can see, we have clear skies across the map due to a high pressure system from the East Sea. However, clouds are expected to move in later at night. Now, tomorrow looks to be a cloudy day here in Korea. There may be light passing showers with total accumulations of about 5 millimeters in the central regions along with North Jeolla and Gyeongsang provinces. But the bad news is that the showers will bring fine dust from China, especially in the central regions, leading to about twice as much fine dust than usual. So please be careful if you have respiratory problems. Now, moving on to tomorrow's numbers. Seoul's morning low reaches 10 degrees with a high of 16. Meanwhile, cities down south will hit the low 20s. Moving on to other regions, Jeju starts off the day at 16 degrees before hitting 23 later on in the day. Meanwhile, Dokdo and Kumgang should peak at 18 and 9 degrees respectively. That's all I have for you this hour, but join me for another update after midnight.
Thanks, Po-kyung. And that's a broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.